Hi all, I have a fascinating game by David Grosvenor to show you today. So this is Leela ID 508, playing black against Stockfish 6. So Leela is on a GTX 1060 graphics card, Stockfish 6 on a 2.8 GHz 4 CPU setup, time control 1 minute per 40 moves. Let's have a look. E4 from Stockfish, we have D6, we go into the Pirc defense, and in particular the two knights variation. So the classic two knights here. Bishop G7, Bishop E2, end of the book for both engines. Black castles, white castles, Knight C6, as though wanting to tempt the closing of the centre with D5. Bishop E3, and again E5 trying to encourage D5. Stockfish obliges here, Knight E7, Queen D3, and now Knight G4 trying for that dark square bishop. Bishop D2, F5, so it's again it's like a King's Indian style position. Not too worried about Knight G5 here. So E takes, G takes, which opens up the G file, of course. So is this long-term aspect of the position going to be celebrated at some point or not? Queen C4, not only holding D5, supporting Knight B5, and against E4 supporting Knight D4. So it seems to be a useful move, but fundamentally in the longer term, there's a blockage here for the C pawn. So any strategic pawn break play with C4, C5 seems a long way off now. We have Knight F6, the knight coming back, which invites at the moment things like Knight takes E5 and then D6 check. But these seem not too harmful at the moment. So it's not even played. So Rook D1. White's not tempted by this. Well, you might think it's dangerous, but I think it's actually harmless here for the moment. So we have instead this move, Rook D1. We have A6. Also, by the way, here is just dropping D5 just in time. Just taking on D5, protects C7. So Rook D1 was played. A6. And here now, A4. Yeah, there might have been a possibility of B5 being useful as well. So A4 clamping down. H6. And now we do have this Knight takes E5. So this is a very interesting pawn structure transition. D6 check. D takes E7. So what's happened here now with this structural change? Well, still black can celebrate the G file, it seems, in theory. We have the queen sitting now on B7, so discouraging the bishop to move. We have C6, which creates some dark square weaknesses, bit of a downside. On bishop E6, there's no clear-cut compensation here. White does seem to be having a big advantage for nothing. So C6 does seem a necessary evil type move, just to defend B7 with the queen. Bishop E3, as though there is a plot on the dark squares now. Dark squares don't seem that comfortable. Bishop E6, Bishop C4. Bishop drops back, inviting White to take to accelerate a G-file initiative. In fact, White does do that. And now Queen C4 is played, which implies things like Bishop C5 to try and put pressure on the dark squares are made available. Queen E8, which looks at things like Queen G6 and Queen H5 now. Bishop C5. So White seems to be gaining headway on the dark square complex now, fixing down more. Things like Bishop D6 is also on the cards. We have Queen G6, a nice attacking style move. It seems as though here now White is cautious with that G file with G3. For example, with Rook D6, then Bishop F8, double attacks, Queen G2 and Bishop takes D6. So that'll be winning material. So White's cautiously playing G3, which does facilitate things like Rook D6. Now Rook E8, Queen B3, and now this pawn is very difficult to defend. There is if the Rook went back, it wouldn't want to. Then there's things like that. So this pawn is a sacrificial lamb here. Leela plays Queen H5, Queen takes, and now the move E4, trying to shut down perhaps this diagonal, which could be useful for White defensively, at the cost of another pawn. So Caveman Leela is activated here after E4. It does seem as though it's a nice position anyway, even with F4 maybe. For example, this position, well, we can still have e4 in any case. And even in this line, it's dangerous for white. Even if the queen does come back, there's e2 check. But maybe there's some potential with the pawns here. So anyway, we have e4 instead, offering another pawn here. h4, not being lured by the pawn in this position. It's too dangerous, it seems, because of queen h3. And then knight g4 here. Well, we get a similar situation to that examined before. That e3 is very good tactically. Which, of course, stops the defense of the f2 pawn, because the bishop on c5 is defending f2 against the mate. So e3 is a classic interruption. But then there's queen g2, and then e2 check is winning material, again, in those circumstances where white might have some play. So anyway, h4 is played. And here we have f4, bishop d6. Yeah, because if taking, well, the queen's hitting the bishop, so if taking queen takes c5, so the bishop's actually a target here. Bishop d6, f3, establishing a form pawn. There might have been a more tactical approach to the position, and I find it amusing. Leela absolutely loves form pawns. I am not purposely finding games with form pawns, honestly. It just seems to be a lot of attacking games. She does like installing the form pawn. It's a common thing. I know I've raved about them in my blitz games, etc. in the past. But here, a more tactical solution does exist as well. But it seems her preference was not this, but the form pawn. Because this situation with the rook lift is also very, very attractive for black. Potentially a very, very nice attacking position could emerge. With a big advantage to black. But the form pawn has a nice feel to it, offers many advantages, cuts the king off, cuts defensive possibilities. There's potential of the two connected, pass pawns potentially. So the form pawn from a visual attractiveness point of view, a visually crushing perspective, is a kind of preference. If there's a choice between that and the other line, this has a lot of attractions. So queen taking on a6 here. On taking on c6, e3, this is just very dangerous for white. This is really just totally crushing, as an example. So that form pawn's doing a good job covering escape squares, and a checkmate is secured there. So queen takes a6, which creates a pass pawn and creates possibilities of queen f1. Queen f5, rook d2. Now white is obviously prepared to meet queen h3 with queen f1 just in time. You can see that. And this would be a mistake. This wasn't played. It would be a mistake. Let's run... sorry, rook d2. Let's run through that for a moment, actually. The queen eviction just causes time loss in a5. It should be at least okay for white there. So black doesn't bother with that. Instead, bishop f8 here, because the queen is doing a useful job blocking the pawn. You don't want to let white further celebrate their trump cards with ease, with automatic ease. So keep the queen in front of the pawn for a moment. Bishop takes f8. Clearly, if bishop f4, then the g-file pin is useful. Queen takes f4. So bishop takes f8. Rook e takes f8, a5. We have now king h8. On e3, that would be a mistake because of check hitting the pawn and the king. So, for example, like this. So, yeah, the king goes out of harm's way. So e3 is now potentially on the cards. Knight d1 stopping e3. But black now has got an ideal attacking position. That theoretical g-file later is in practice very, very dangerous here. White's greed to try and get this pass pawn winning in b7 is punished now. Queen f4, putting the real pressure on d2 and g3 now. We have knight e3. It's all pretty hopeless here. I'll give you other examples. If king e2, then rook takes g3 is devastating. For example, like this. checkmate. So this position, it's pretty hopeless. Queen f1, there's knight h5. Smashing through on the g-file is quicker than the a pawn can be. For example, here, it's absolutely smashing white to bits. As you can see, even if white doesn't get mated, the rook's just going to come back and gobble that a pawn. So it's all very, very good news here. Knight e3, we have, I hope you can guess, rook takes g3 check. And now not taking on g3 because there might be knight g2 and stuff. Just taking out that knight, rook f2, knight g4. So threatening to take and then mate on h2. Queen comes back. Queen c5. So e3 is now on the card with e2 as a discovered check. And this is pretty hopeless for white. c3 is played. If b4, by the way, there's a nice centralizing move, queen e5 here. Threatening queen takes g3. To which white is helpless against and ends up getting totally obliterated in this line. So there's no point trying to nudge the queen away from pinning the rook because of queen e5. So we have here, well, a fairly hopeless position. So c3 is played. We have e3. Now clearly rook takes, there's e2 check. And this also is useful to run with check, to promote with check. So there's no time for white to, it's pretty hopeless. So we have a6 tokenly using that trump card. It's too little too late. And now queen e5 coming in for queen takes g3 and mating with queen h4. There's no time for the pawn. We have queen h3 here just to show, there's, put that on the board. You know, here queen takes just threatens queen h4 mating. Just to show this scenario to the extreme. Yeah, it'll be checkmate there. So we have actually here we have queen h3, h5, a7, and now this pawn is an issue a little bit. Apparently, well, it's worthy enough to play rook a8. We have rook d1, giving up now. There's things like rook takes a7 here anyway to play queen e1 with crushing effect. You know, just to put this on the board. This will be fatally weakening the first rank. So there's no moves for the white there. So it's hopeless actually. So we have rook d1, just giving up that pawn. Check, queen f1, queen takes g3, and now white essentially resigns with this move. It's hopeless. Just giving up the rook to stave off being mated. So it's adjudicated here as a win for black. After king takes check, there's just rook f7, there's no more checks. So I thought this was a fascinating attacking game, offering the b7 pawn as a sacrificial lamb. Installing a fawn pawn as a preference to more tactical methods makes the game more visually attractive, visually appealing to me. Leela is literally offering strategic devices so vividly, it seems every game is instructive. We can use this in our own games. The tactical solutions, the more tactical solutions, which might not have involved the visual fawn pawn, for me, they're less intuitive to use. And that's why I find these games absolutely wonderful, because that's been demonstrated all the time. Connected pass pawns, fawn pawns, you know, sacrificing on the queen side, you know, reducing counterplay. There's a lot of strategic motives which are being evidenced in these games. I hope you'll agree too. Comments, questions, likes, shares, appreciated. Thanks so much.